going to talk about the Service Manager, Service Catalog, and self-service in Service Manager. I think everybody probably realizes by now that we've only got computer audio for this session. And I'm here with my colleague, Nick Datillo. Hi, guys. So why don't we jump right into it. We're not going to do, just to set expectations, we're not going to do a demo of the self-service portal today. We do have a bunch of screenshots, just simply because it's a lot of material to cover in a fairly short period of time. So we're going to go kind of wide, but not very deep today, and be happy to take questions at the very end for anybody who has them. What we are going to cover is we're going to cover the service catalog in Service Manager 2012, which it sounds like when we joined, Kathleen was talking a bit about. We'll talk about self-service, which is essentially the portal and how the service catalog and the portal work together. And as I say, we'll be happy to take questions at the end. And we have links to demonstrations that other folks Microsoft has done on the self-service portal that we'll distribute with the YouTube video that posts after this. So if you're looking for a demo, you'll be able to see that with those links that'll come after. So to be clear, when we talk about end-user self-service in Service Manager 2012, we're really talking about the combination of the service catalog and the self-service portal. The two work together. I mean, you could theoretically use the service catalog alone, but it's really intended as a resource within the self-service portal, as we're going to try to illustrate in subsequent slides. So the concept of the service catalog in Service Manager is as follows. It's really a container for self-service items, and what we're really talking about are incidents and requests. It's there to organize and to present the content that the end user is going to see in the self-service portal. And this last point is important. It's not really a comprehensive MOF or ITIL-based IT service catalog. It's not really intended for defining all of your IT services. And I think this will become a bit clearer as we get further into the presentation. As I said, its main purpose is for organization of your content in your self-service portal. So what's in the service catalog? And these are objects that you're actually going to find defined in Service Manager. The first thing we have are service offering categories. Then we have service offerings. We've got request offerings. And then we've got catalog item groups. And we're going to get into what each of these are in the next slide. Okay, so yeah, service offering categories, and really what we're talking about here, it's primarily going to be objects used to organize content. Like Pete had said, conceptually what the service catalog does for us is allow us to organize our requests that can be made on the self-service portal. And the service offering category is the first object we have that lets us do that organization. It's the highest level of organization that we can do. What that's going to let us do is organize the next level down, which is our service offerings. It's sort of a container or a category for one or more service offerings. Service offering then is a same kind of thing. It's another object that's going to allow us to organize content. It's the second level of organization. Service offerings do contain additional bits of data like descriptions and titles for the service offering. They contain a bit more in terms of service level information, cost information about the requests that are inside of it. So they do have some data about them, but at their core they really are another object meant for organizing content. Within those service offerings then we'll have multiple request offerings. And these request offerings represent the actual requests that end users can make on the portal. These have web forms that are associated with them that will ask for information that users can input, and these ultimately are going to generate either an incident or a service request inside of Service Manager. And then the catalog item group is really just a group of request offerings and service offerings.
And these are used for controlling access to the portal. So we can say a certain group of users are going to get access to these service offerings or these request offerings, while other groups will get a different set, which allows you to publish service offerings that are specific to a group of folks, both from an organizational point of view. Like if I'm not in finance, I don't need to see finance-related requests, but also from a security point of view, which becomes especially important if you've got automation through Orchestrator tied into these request offerings. Controlling that access through these catalog item groups becomes a bigger consideration then.
Yeah, so in terms of the self-service portal, it's really essentially a SharePoint site that's got some pre-packaged web parts. And there was, I think, some conversation a little bit earlier about the difference between the 2010 version of the portal and the 2012 version of the portal. They are very different, and in fact, for those who've upgraded, you probably know that the portal is really the only thing that doesn't upgrade between Service Manager 2010 and 2012. The portal is totally new in Service Manager 2012. It's essentially the end user interface into the Service Manager CMDB. It is not an analyst interface. We do get that question a lot. It's in that sense not a lot different than the self-service portal in Service Manager 2010. It really is very much end user facing. It's not something that's designed for an analyst to use in lieu of the full console. So what it lets users do is, and we touched on this a bit earlier, we're really talking about generating incidents and requests. So the users can request help, they can request some sort of work to be done, access to some sort of resource, or maybe even just request information. They can also monitor the status of their requests at the self-service portal. They can approve or reject requests if they are recorded as an approver. So, for example, if Nick is my boss and his approval is required in order for me to gain access to something, Nick is going to be able to go to the self-service portal to approve or to reject that request.
And that's particularly important because in a lot of different use cases that we say, approvers are not necessarily folks within IT. If you've got access requests for certain applications, oftentimes those application owners aren't within IT, they're business users. So it's important that those folks have an interface into Service Manager to vote on review activities without needing to have a console available to them, and that allows you to do that.
And the last thing we can do is search and download help articles. These would be the knowledge articles that are in the Service Manager CMDB. So the end user is going to be able to search for and to actually download RTF copies of these help articles via the self-service portal. So to kind of put it together here, what we've got is the end user being able to submit requests, and when we say request, I think you probably know, but just to confirm, we're talking about either a service request or an incident in Service Manager. They're going to be picking from within the Service Manager service catalog, which is going to have, and we've kind of outlined it here, you'll have your categories, you'll have different service offerings, and then you'll have request offerings within those service offerings. That is ultimately going to generate either an incident or a service request that's going to appear in the console for an IT analyst to pick up. So to put some context to this, or to use a real-world example, so let's say that we've got in our service catalog, we've got a category for enterprise applications. And we maybe have three service offerings within the category of enterprise applications. We have Dynamics, we have CRM, we have Quality Center. And then we have, under the Dynamics service offering, we have a specific request offering to report an issue with Dynamics. So our end user can then select that request offering, submit the request through the portal, and then that's going to generate a new incident in the console that an analyst is going to pick up and assign to himself or herself or potentially escalate, etc. So let me just stop for a second. And any questions before we jump into some screenshots here of an actual portal? Okay, so this is a shot of the service catalog. So this would be the home page of the portal. This is what comes by default. And when I say this, I mean the web part itself. Now this has been configured for a particular customer. So we've gone in and we've configured the categories, applications, IT help desk, PeopleSoft. We've configured the various service offerings that you see here. Each one of the items that you see on here is an individual service offering. And we've also actually done some light branding to this as well, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So this next screen here, this is inside of one of those service offerings. So actually, if I just hop back under IT help desk, like Pete said, this is our category here, and inside of our category we have all of these service offerings. And here you can see the request hardware service offering. So if I click on that, I'm going to get what we see on the next slide, which is the service offering landing page. And here I can see some information about that service offering, its title, its description. A little bit below this we might have cost or SLA information recorded about this service offering. And then what I can see on the left side here is a list of request offerings inside of this service offering. Now there is another section on this form in the standard Service Manager portal which displays related knowledge articles. So if I wanted to publish knowledge articles directly to my end users about requesting hardware, maybe some instructions or a link to the form that they need to fill out before they submit the request, I can publish those right here against the service offering so folks can see that before they go in and actually generate the request. So if we then go in and click on the Request a Wireless Card Request Offering, it'll take us to this intermediate page, which again will present us with some information. Here you can see the related help articles section where we're giving them again another opportunity to get some self-help before they go in and actually generate the request. We can see the service offering that this was a part of and allows them to jump back up. And we've got our big Go to Request button that we can click, which will actually generate the web form so we can fill out the request. And these web forms are dynamic. You build them right inside of the Service Manager console, and you can decide what questions you're going to ask, what kind of data input you want back as an answer. Here you can see we've got two date pickers and then a text box that we're asking for information back. And these are ultimately going to map to data inside of a service request in the Service Manager console once the request is submitted. There's a bunch of different controls that you can use here, and there's some data validation that you can do as well. So for instance, inside of a text box, you can say that you're looking for an email address, and the portal will validate the input to make sure that it's got an @ sign and then a dot somewhere in there, so you can validate the responses that come back. Yeah, you can do some validation in these date pickers too, so that if you, say, didn't want to let somebody choose a pickup date earlier than 5 days from now, you could do that. So once you fill out the request and you click Next, you get this summary page where you can review your responses before you click Submit. And once you do that, you get this acknowledgement page, which gives you the link to the service request. It shows you the date that it was requested and gives you some links to either go back to the home page or go back to review all of your requests. If you click on that link with the service request number, it will take you to this My Requests page where folks can review and monitor the status of their service request. You can see here it gives them some basic details. They can see the activities that are inside of the service request and what the status of those are. So if I've got 3 or 4 activities inside of a service request, maybe an approval, and then a few manual activities that need to get completed before
the request is complete, I can get a general snapshot of where we are in that process. The portal also gives folks an opportunity under user input there to ask questions, to add comments about the request, and these will show up in the console as an end-user comment, and they can also attach files down here to either the service request or the incident.
And it's worth noting that everything that we just saw on those screenshots, as Nick had mentioned earlier, was done in the Service Manager UI. We have done a little bit of branding directly in SharePoint, but we didn't have to go build those forms from scratch, and we didn't have to do anything in, say, Visual Studio or in SharePoint to configure those forms. The user prompts in particular, those date pickers that you saw, all of that we were able to configure in the Service Manager UI. So, and these are just some design considerations. We were just kind of talking about this, the idea that you have some ability to tailor the look and feel of web parts, of the built-in web parts, that is. The data in the web parts can't really be customized. There are some things that you can just turn on or turn off, but if you wanted to, say, add some additional data into one of the built-in web parts, you're not going to be able to do that. The portal look and feel can be tailored in SharePoint, and we have done some of that in the example that you saw before. We just applied our own theme. There are some things that can be done globally as well to change colors and fonts in the web parts. And we've had a number of customers who've preferred this. They, as you can imagine, want the portal to fit in with other SharePoint sites that they've got. And that's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. Now, you can custom build your own web parts in Visual Studio from a base web part that is provided. I don't know if Nick, you want to say anything about that. It's not something that we've generally gotten into, but it is something that's possible.
Do you have the custom page on?
You know what? I didn't get a chance to put a screenshot of that. Okay. We might be able to pull it up at the very end, though, outside of the deck. Yeah,
that's the only other thing I'll say about that is, one of the other things that we've done in terms of customizing the look of particularly the home page of the portal, is we've built our own custom home page, just in HTML. Very simple to do. Inside of SharePoint Designer, you don't need any knowledge of building HTML web pages to use that. And that gives us more control over the look and feel and the kind of content that displays there. And that's really just one of the benefits of the service catalog being based on SharePoint, is that if you've got the SharePoint expertise in-house, then you've got a lot of flexibility in terms of controlling the presentation of the data.
The web parts are supported in IE 8, 9, and 10, and require Silverlight 4. As you might imagine, it's important to test it across different browsers and different display resolutions. There are some width and depth settings that will come into play with the web parts. They're easily modified within SharePoint. You'll probably want to fix the width of the web parts, and it's probably a good idea to fix the height of the web parts in some cases too. And as I say, all that stuff is pretty easily done. It's pretty straightforward from within SharePoint itself. In terms of designing the service catalog itself, and some of this goes to self-service generally, we find it's a good idea to try to figure out what sort of appetite your organization has for self-service. We've worked with a number of customers who have gotten very, very excited about the possibilities for the portal and have started with a lot of content. And that may or may not be the right thing for your organization. We've also had some customers who've wanted to keep it very, very, very simple, surprisingly so. But I think it's important to have a good sense for what your users are going to respond positively to. And that kind of goes to the second point there, which is to try to think like and involve your end users as much as possible. Let them drive terminology. Let them help you determine how to best organize the content in the portal, because what makes sense to somebody in IT obviously may not make quite as much sense or may not make any sense to an end user. So I think having them closely involved throughout is a very good idea. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be substantial involvement, but getting them involved along the way to just validate decisions, I think, is a good idea.
So the next bullet here says no logic in request offerings. What we really mean here is that the forms on those request offerings that users fill out to generate an incident or service request, those are static. And we can't, for instance, say if the answer to question number 1 is A, then change the options available to them in question number 2. The forms are going to be the same every time. So with that in mind, you have to plan sort of within that constraint. And what it has ended up meaning for us is that you need to create multiple request offerings in place of using that logic. So for instance, if I'm going to have a new user request and the questions you're going to ask that person vary from one department to another in terms of the software they'll get access to or whether or not they can have a company credit card, for instance. That logic can't be built into the single web form. So what you end up doing is creating a few different request offerings for the different types of new users that can join. And it doesn't necessarily mean you need one for each department. Generally, you can abstract it out a little bit from there and have maybe 2 or 3 different request offerings that cover everybody in the organization. But that is one thing that you're likely to have to deal with as you go through and planning and building your service catalog. And the other thing that's important is to keep an eye out for opportunities for automation with Orchestrator. If you've got Orchestrator already installed, it's a no-brainer to start to plug some Orchestrator runbooks into these request offerings to allow Service Manager to trigger Orchestrator, automate even just a small piece of any of your request offerings. A real common example of this would be requesting access to an application. Orchestrator doesn't need to automate the entire process. The approvals can be done manually. The data entry is done manually on the portal. But Orchestrator can add a user to a group for you. And what it helps you do is sort of establish some Orchestrator runbooks, helps you find some use cases to start to introduce Orchestrator into your environment. And Orchestrator is the kind of tool that we see building inside of customer environments over time. Things start out fairly simplistic, and over time they get more and more complex, and which adds more and more value to what Orchestrator does for you. So keep an eye out for those opportunities and see where you've got a process that's consistent enough to let you pretty easily set up some orchestration to do some of the work for you.
All right, so we'll be happy to take any questions if anybody has any. Okay, so the question for Miguel: have you seen any implementation of Service Manager in support several companies instead of just one? Are you talking about like multi-tenancy? We ran across that some time ago. I don't think the application is really intended to do that. And I can tell you, we typically work with a single implementation at a time. I don't know if you have any ideas on that, Nick.
Yeah, I think the best way that Service Manager can be used in this case is to deploy multiple management groups, so different isolated implementations of Service Manager, especially if the configuration needs to vary from one company to another. One of the benefits of Service Manager's data warehouse is that it can pull from multiple sources. You can be registered with multiple Service Manager management servers. So even if you've got, say, 4 different Service Manager management groups, you can roll all of that data into the same data warehouse, so your reporting is centralized. But it keeps the console configuration, the portal configuration. And are there any other questions? Or does that help answer your question? And sorry, just one more point on that. The data warehouse, when you register multiple service manager management groups with it, will automatically reconcile any kind of CI data you have. So if those companies share any configuration items like servers, or if there's a central group that provides all of the servers, you don't have to worry about any duplicates from a configuration item side. It'll automatically reconcile those. The work items, it won't reconcile, which is what you want, because you'll have, IR 123 in one environment will actually be different than IR 123 in a different environment. So the data warehouse out of the box does a pretty good job at managing that kind of thing.
Any other questions? Okay, well, then we'll wrap it up. Feel free to visit our website at any time, www.acceleres.com. And then we've got our YouTube channel, too, and I think we'll have this recording posted up there probably within the next day or so. So for those who maybe didn't have audio, not that you can hear me saying this right now, you'll be able to get the clip there and to watch the presentation again.
And if you do have any questions, you can email info@acceleres.com and we'll get back to you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.